Good afternoon. We're going to get started. This is our state ledge session. We just going to get some updates on where we are with our priorities list, as well as any other issues that Ms. Wenger may want to share with us. So I'll just go ahead and turn it over to you.
So this is one agenda. I didn't have a line in there that said update on, or 30 days left of session. So I will just provide you a brief update. So there's 2 weeks left in the 90-day session. Some of the big things we watch the budgets. The operating budget is in conference, and that's where there's a lot of discussion about the FY20 public school construction appropriation and the Kerwin bill. The 83rd day is next Monday, so that's the deadline by which the legislature must act unless you want to have a letter sent down by the governor to extend the session, which won't happen this year. And then as soon as they finish that, they'll go to the capital budget. The capital budget's off both of the floors, and I can tell you more about that too later on and send some sheets about where that stands. So that's kind of the big money stuff, where that stands. And again, 2 weeks away, so we're really starting to look at a kind of a focus group of pieces of legislation and what's going to go on in the operating budget. But today, the discussion is going to be about the county's 2019 session state priorities. And since 4 people are new, I thought I'd just mention how this document is developed. And the development of this document typically starts really midsummer, when my staff and I send a memo out to the executive branch agencies asking for input about what pieces of legislation they are interested, local or statewide, having the county pursue on their behalf in the upcoming session. And also, if they have certain areas, issue areas, policy areas, fiscal areas, that are not necessarily a piece of legislation, but items that they'd like to advance or potentially not advance. I mean, for example, we have preemption on typically. And so that conversation starts then. There's a list that gets put together on the executive side that then gets vetted to the county executive, and then we send that list over to the council, and we start meeting with you about what items you don't want on there that the executive branch has on there, or that you'd like to keep, and things that also you would like to add yourself. And that culminates into the document last year. This is the document that you have before you that was developed through that process. And it's the document that is submitted to the county's delegation at something that's called the priorities hearing. And the priorities hearing is a big public hearing that takes place usually in November. And the county, it's usually the county council president, the county executive, present the county's priorities at that hearing. And also it is a hearing that members of the public can come, and associations, lots of times University of Shady Grove, Montgomery College, Montgomery County Public Schools, and also just individual members of the public can come also speak to the state delegation about what they believe are priorities of theirs that the delegation should be pursuing in the upcoming session. So that's how the process has worked in the past. Doesn't mean it needs to work that way always in the future. But since I've been with the county, that's kind of how that process has worked. And again, it culminates in a big public hearing that usually takes place in November. Okay? So we can just start thumbing through, and we'll tell you where we are on some of these things. Not surprising if you go back and look at these documents over the years. They're posted on our website. The first section, I mean, the county's generally 2 highest priorities have to do with public K through 12 education or K through 16 and transportation. So that's how this, not surprisingly, this document starts. And Kathleen is primary on Kerwin, so I'm going to let her take off on this first section.
Okay, so for Kerwin, we have 2 different related processes going on. We have a bill that was introduced that deals with funding in both FY20 and FY21, and we have the budget bill process. The bill would allocate $325 million in new funding in FY20, which would carry through to FY21, and it includes a mandatory appropriation for FY21 of an additional $387 million to be set aside to be used for final recommendations of the Kerwin Commission. The bill itself, though, is sitting in both the House and Senate while budget decisions are being made. And the House, when it sent the budget to the Senate, reduced that $325 million to $300 million, and sent it to the Senate. The Senate has a pretty dramatic difference with the House at this point with regard to special education. This House bill would have allocated about $137 million I apologize, to special ed, and the Senate reduced that to $33.3 million. Now, there is a contingency there. There's another $95 million, which the Senate has said could be available for special ed if a bill relating to what they call marketplace facilitators passes. Marketplace facilitators being businesses like Wayfair that currently we don't collect sales tax from, but under a recent Supreme Court case this past year, we can collect sales tax. So there is a bill moving through that if that's passed, $95 million it would be connected to special ed. We were originally puzzled as to whether that was moving, but we did hear from some of our leadership, fiscal leaders, that it may well move. So that special ed funding may eventually be available. But just in terms of numbers for Montgomery County, what we would be looking at is $8.1 million to MCPS related to a teacher salary incentive program, same in both the House and Senate. 19 point.
Did send them all these numbers, just FYI.
Oh, okay. Mel says we sent you all these numbers, so unless there's question about the specific numbers, don't need to go into that.
Or you can too.
It's up to you.
Just for the record, I think it's good to have this.
Okay.
We could just go through.
Okay. So special ed, in the House, it would have been $19.1 million for MCPS. Under the Senate version right now, it's 4.6. There's a struggling learners transition grant. It's $23 million statewide, and it's a pot of money available to help struggling learners of any kind with creative approaches as determined by school systems. And House and Senate are the same. It's $2.73 million. There's also a new concentration of poverty grant that would go to, it's a school-by-school grant, and if a school has at least 80% free and reduced price meal students, it's a $248,000 grant, which is it's envisioned as a first-year movement towards supporting schools with concentration of poverty. It's to staff a behavioral health coordinator, and a school coordinator in terms of building towards what eventually the Kerwin Commission sees as a type of community school with wraparound services for these kinds of schools. So for Montgomery County, we had 8 schools that qualified, so about $2 million, same in the Senate. For full day, there's also a supplemental grant that exists right now for the number of 4-year-olds that are in full day public pre-K. The current formula, the county doesn't benefit from because it's only available if a jurisdiction provides that full day pre-K to all 4-year-olds in its system. There's actually only 4 counties that get a grant under that right now, Baltimore City being one, and then 3 smaller counties. But the bill that's pending, and in the budget discussions as well, it expands that supplemental pre-K grant to apply to every jurisdiction that has any students who are 4 years old and in full-day pre-K. And for Montgomery County, we've got 1,008, according to MCPS, students in that category. So there is a difference between the House and the Senate because when the House looked at the bill, MSD had Montgomery County down as having no students in this category. But with the help of MCPS and Department of Legislative Services. Essentially, we were able to get the right numbers in there, so the Senate version would have a $2.3 million grant to MCPS for pre-K with 4-year-olds and full day. So the budget is in conference. We need to see how that works out, and would be happy to answer any questions.
All right. Councilmember Friedson.
Yeah, I just had a quick question on the discrepancy between the House and Senate version, and you'd mentioned the Senate including a possibility of additional funds based on, I'm assuming you said Wayfair, the South Dakota Wayfair Supreme Court
Right.
ruling. You said 90 million is what would be anticipated in FY '20?
Well, the only thing I can tell
At
you,
least they say that 90 million. I don't want to make it that it's your number, but.
right, the only thing I can tell you is 95 million has been made contingent. 95 million allocated to special ed has been made contingent on enactment of that bill.
That seems ambitious. So I mean, I just think for our purposes, Amazon which now collects remote sales, was half that. So that, I mean, that was just an estimate. I don't even know if that came in exactly what was anticipated, but, and there's no retroactivity as part of that Supreme Court ruling. There had to be a safe harbor for small businesses. There was no retroactivity, and so it was a pretty narrowly, it was a big win for states who had been pushing for this, including Maryland. But for anybody who is looking to make a lot of money quickly, the Supreme Court ruling was fairly narrow in terms of our ability to do that. So this would require us to put in place the bill and collect in, real-time money, and 95 million just sounds like, a lot more than I would have expected we're going to get for this fiscal year. So I just
No, I
wanted
hear
to
you.
note that. I could be wrong, but I
I
just,
hear you.
based on
And
my
there have
observation.
been discussions about those estimates. There's some people who think it's much lower, as you suspect. So that question of what the revenues will actually be, I don't know. But I just know that in terms of the budget bill, it's simply made contingent on enactment of the legislation.
Just large online retailers not named Amazon without retroactivity or, and with the safe harbor for the smaller retailers, which would be like eBay, a lot of the sellers on eBay and Etsy and some of those others. It wouldn't seem like it would leave a whole lot, and that this is going to be a major windfall that would fill the gap for our education funding, between the two chambers. But
I hear you.
I appreciate it.
And if you hear a reference to the Wayfair bill, that would be this bill.
Yeah.
If you're familiar with Wayfair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the Wayfair bill because it was the Supreme Court case of Dakota versus Wayfair where they challenged what Nexus was. And so this would be us putting in a law or the state of Maryland putting in a law to reflect that Supreme Court case. I'm just skeptical that the numbers are going to match up to what is anticipated, so I think we should prepare accordingly.
Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you, Council President. Just wanted to go over again what you explained on the pre-K numbers. So the initial package did not recognize that we have a number of 4-year-olds in full-time? Was that what the provision was?
Right, and full day K. Yeah, it was, we were very puzzled because the bill came out and it has this supplemental pre-K grant in it. And it literally lists numbers in the bill of, it was 29.2
by county,
million.
kinda?
And it listed it by county, and there was 0 for Montgomery County. And so, well, I apologize. This part of the bill actually was not listed by number in the bill. So, but if you looked at the fiscal note, that's actually what we did. We looked at the fiscal note where it did list it by county, and it had Montgomery County as 0, which led to OIR contacting MCPS, MCPS understanding that there was some kind of miscommunication between MSDE and MCPS about the number of students, 4-year-olds, that we have in full day K in Montgomery County.
And this is a formula, though. So first of all, several years ago, we began the expansion towards full-day pre-K. So hundreds of those, I think, have been added in the last few years. The 1,000 number that we're at today is much higher than it was a few years ago when we began to add millions of dollars to the budget each year to strive towards full-day pre-K. If this is formula-driven, then I can infer that additional expansion of four-year-old, because I don't think we're all the way through the population of four-year-olds who are eligible, right? So therefore, if we expand further, there's potentially more funding available. And as I just did a back-of-the-envelope calculation, if it's 1,000 students roughly, and it's $2.5 million, and it's roughly $2,500 per kid.
You're right on target, because the bill outlines the formula for calculation, and it's the state share of our per pupil foundation amount
Okay.
times the number of students.
Uh-huh.
And our per pupil foundation amount will be finalized in the next couple months, but right now the draft says it's 2,300.
2,300 per pupil.
2,300
So
per
if we
pupil.
add more this year, then we're eligible for more as well.
Right.
Is that right?
That's right.
No? Melanie's got a,
No, that is right. I just want to remind you, this is what you call the bridge bill. So you don't know how it's all going to end.
Right.
And there's also another caveat I'd like to mention in the context of the Kerwin discussion, and that's that a lot of the money that we're talking about is fenced money, which means the governor has to agree to bring the money down. And if you notice, he hasn't said a lot. And so
Okay.
he's a key player in this particular negotiation as far as the operating budget and how it corresponds to the Kerwin Bridge bill.
good point. So we will know relatively soon, all things considered, and if this provision were to remain, then that's just something that we'll factor in as we weigh additional investments in our budget, is there's an incentive that we get additional rebates when we expand the four-year-old program.
Yes, as Mel indicated, the bill itself only deals with FY '20 and FY '21. But the budget bill, really the only thing you control, well, the budget bill is everything's gonna flow from the budget bill. But if some kind of pre-K grant in this form is for FY '21, it's likely that it'll be FY '20. It's likely that it'll also be FY '21, but we have to see. As Mel indicated, the whole idea here was that they're calling FY '20 year zero of the 10-year plan that's outlined in the Kerwin report. So if FY '20 is year zero, even if they have a bill that they pass that requires a mandatory appropriation for this pre-K grant or anything else, they can change it next year in the budget. And that's the idea, that they'll come back after the Kerwin Commission finishes its review of school finance formulas, tweaks any of its final policy recommendations, and essentially they could do anything in FY '21. We don't know. We just know what they're looking at now, and could go from there. And as Mel said, the governor, the General Assembly tries to fence off money as a way to push the governor into spending money in certain ways. As Mel indicated, in the past, the governor hasn't always spent money that's been fenced off for a specific purpose.
Thanks.
Okay, I don't see any other lights, so.
Okay, public school construction. So, again, perennial on the list. Obviously, the school system has great need, and the county has great need to be able to house students or have a seat for every student. And so, there were a number of pieces of legislation. We discussed them before. It came in. There's a piece of legislation that has passed. And then there's also that FY '20 budget. And again, this involves some maneuvers in the operating budget that have as an FY '20 appropriation right now, $445 million statewide in the Senate and $500 million to be used statewide in the House. That's where things are going to need to be reconciled in the operating budget. Last year, just kind of by way of reference, we picked up about 14.5% of the total statewide pot. But then let's move on to the bigger fish, which is the pieces of legislation, of which one has passed. And it combines a number of things. It is the Stadium Authority concept that was the basis for the revitalization program in Baltimore City in 2013. Also, Prince George's County had a separate standalone piece of legislation that allowed them to utilize a P3 model. So that standalone piece of legislation of sorts has been absorbed into this piece of legislation. Also, there were a firm mandate finally for I'm going to call it the Enrollment Growth and Relocatable Classroom, the EGRC program that the county's been a significant beneficiary of. We're the largest beneficiaries of that program because it's allocated based on your growth in population and how many relocatables you have. So that's now going to have a mandated amount in it. It starts at 40, and then in FY26 it moves to 80, and even though we've always described this as a mandated capital appropriation, it actually wasn't, and now the language is written so that it is actually a firm mandate. And then also, so the stadium authority components are not a big surprise, except that in the piece of legislation, it writes into the law exactly what the percentages will be. There are four subdivisions that will receive 18% of the bond proceeds. Again, it's a $2.2 billion package. It's the debt services financed by $125 million a year that would accrue to the Education Trust Fund. And Montgomery County is one of the four that's an 18%. Also, it is amended in a manner that doesn't make it an IAC determination who would manage the school construction program, but of sorts makes it a subdivision option. Also allows A&E to be included, which is nice. So that's some more of the soft costs, which are it's a helpful provision. And then there's actually some MOU, some pieces of kind of strengthened accountability that the IAC, the county actually, they name counties and the school system and the stadium authority would, need to work through. So that's kind of a new section of the law. And then there's a new program added that my guess is targeted at particularly Baltimore City likely, as a kind of sorts of counterweight probably to the EGRC program, and it's called a priority fund. And it has the same type of structure that the EGRC has as far as how the money will flow. It's a firm mandate, and it starts kind of at 40 and then goes up to $80 million a year, just like the EGRC. And what is a priority funding project? It's a list that's going to be created by the IAC and also members of the NOT Commission, which we will have a member on that group. Mark Corman will be on that group. And so you end up now with, if the bill passes, and again, it's not clear. I mean, the Senate has not acted on anything yet. They've only shown their hands on the FY20 cutout for public school construction. But if this bill would pass, then you end up with a public school construction program that has kind of 4 sub-programs, what I'll call the base program that you're all familiar with, the EGRC program, again, that we're significant beneficiaries in, and then I'll call it the stadium authority component of the program, which is $2.2 million, in authority to issue stadium authority debt. So that program doesn't go on forever. You can get your money. We would be at about $125 million a year if it's a 4 or 5 year program. That would be our 18% share. And then this new kind of priority funding program. So that's how public school construction would lay out at a later date if the piece of legislation passes. Again, we don't know what the fate of this is going to be. The Senate, again, has not acted on anything, so we're going to have to just wait and see. The bill is actually going to be heard in the Senate on Wednesday. So that's where public school construction stands.
Okay, Councilman Reamer.
Thank you. Did you just say $125 million a year? Is that for the whole state, or is that the potential county share?
No, that's the count. That would be the county share. So $2.2 billion authorization, and the county would have 18% of that.
And that would be beginning in FY20?
21.
21?
So it's currently, I mean, it's going to take a little bit of time to probably ramp the program up. I mean, and also not all counties necessarily are going to be able to come get their money. I mean, again, also you have to ramp up the debt service portion of this. So, but yeah, it's roughly, I can't recall, but it's about for the duration of the program, if you came and got your money, it would be about another 125.
It's a huge amount of money. I mean, it's like not a
It of
small amount of
sorts
money.
would double the size of the program that Montgomery County has had. I mean, Montgomery County's been receiving, over the past few years, about $60 million a year, just short of $60 million in state assistance for its public school construction program. And for a period of time, this would roughly double that.
Double that,
Double that.
just in and of itself, so we're ending up with, it's fantastic. Hope that this succeeds.
So
Yeah,
do we.
yeah. Be something to write home about, that's for sure.
Yeah, it would be good.
Okay, I don't see any more lights on this issue.
The next on the list is, because the county has always been a significant financial participant in universities at Shady Grove, and also it's an important component of delivering, higher education to county residents and other people. We typically have Shady Grove on the priorities list. We do again this year. And the specific ask this year was about their STEM programs. Building 4 is almost, I think, I'm not certain when the ribbon cutting is, but it's fairly soon, and there was concern that now that you have the, capital infrastructure, you need to have programs to be able to be provided in the building. And so they were after additional share of this workforce money for STEM, and that money is there. It's $5 million, and it's on both sides of the budget right now. And then, no questions, we can move on to the transportation section. And this is kind of Sarah and me, so I'm going to let Sarah start.
So the first priority was Vision Zero coordination, and Delegate Polakovich Carr actually is sitting here, but it's her bill that would establish Vision Zero within MDOT. And I know that there's then a reporting requirement by the end of the year to the governor and the General Assembly about how the state can create strategies for making fewer zero traffic deaths. That bill passed the House and is going to go to Senate Finance on Wednesday, and we do support that bill. Another improving pedestrian safety is the pedestrian safety bill, which has to do with crosswalks, and Councilmember Glass was involved in supporting that bill also with a separate letter to the committee. Right now, the fine for going through not yielding to pedestrians in a crosswalk is $80. It would have risen to $150. It changed, the House bill was amended, and it would be a fine of not less than $1,000 for doing this, retaining the possibility of 2 months imprisonment. The Senate bill was not amended. Both bills will be heard this week in their respective other committees. Another bill related to improving pedestrian safety and just roadways is the Don't Block the Box, a statewide Don't Block the Box. There was a local bill that unfortunately did not advance. The statewide, the House bill is before JPR. That's Delegate Carr's bill, and it does not have a hearing yet. That bill was amended, however, when it passed the House to strip it of the $90 citation amount and points, which is what the county had wanted, the points to be removed and the fine to be reduced. But we haven't exactly figured out how that happened or why that happened. But the general consensus seems to be that the courts don't want to be told how to deal with the level of the violation. So at this point, it's pending before JPR. And then there was another bill that we were supporting, but it did not advance, complete streets, dealing with sidewalks within priority areas, repair and maintenance, and that bill did not advance. Did you have anything to add? Any questions on any of those?
I don't see any lights.
Also, we do have the speed bill that is advancing too, that I think is, should be included as, when you talk about kind of Vision Zero concept. So that's there. And trying to think, but it's a good day. It's good that the statewide Vision Zero bill's, moving and things like that. The next section of the transportation section is something you're very familiar with, you had a big hearing or a big meeting with the Secretary of the Maryland Department of Transportation last week about, and that's the traffic relief plan, or parts thereof. But overall, the council and the county executive have weighed in on several pieces of legislation. There's also, there's budget bill language in the operating budget advanced by the House, but not in the Senate bill. Again, I think we sent you some of this detail last week. And there's also a P3 bill that did get out of the House at the bitter end right before crossover, that of sorts, I mean, the state now does have some experience, right or wrong, with P3s, and it's their state statute that has, of sorts, allowed some of the things that have happened, that have happened. So they do have a little bit of experience now. So this piece of legislation would revise the state statute. It is focused, I will say, largely at very big P3s, of which there's only one right now. So the bill's amended so that it only applies to, procurements of this manner that are $500 million or more. But it significantly strengthens the pre-solicitation plan process and the timing of that, and also the oversight. It requires some oversight by the Legislative Policy Committee. It just requires a lot more information, steps that are better timed so that there's ability for additional input, and also things like the P3 companies that they have, there's more vetting of their financial situation. So it's improvements to the P3, the procurement law that's on the state books that just strengthen the program that they put in place a number of years ago. But again, it's largely targeted at this point to the one big P3 that's out there, which is the traffic relief plan.
Okay, Councilmember Beamer.
So the conversation we had with Pete Ron last week was very interesting, and I think we've got some real issues here. It had always seemed to me that doing the Beltway was going to be really a big stretch for them, and that it would require going outside the right-of-way as well as funding from the state. But I think what we heard from Pete Ron was it won't require funding from the state because there's so much traffic volume coming off of 95 that's continuing on down the seaboard, and that it actually spins off money for other projects in the P3 vision. And so it seems like if that's the case, I don't know what say the legislature has over this whole thing. I'm very concerned that there's the way that the P3 law has been, was framed, that the state legislature will have really no input on this project. Is that how you read it also, Mel, or?
Well, I'm kind of, I could not access your hearing, so I don't have the benefit of the conversation that went on. It's on my list to go back and listen to that hearing, to the meeting that you had with Secretary Ron. I will say that there is a lot of focus on this issue, and I think there's a lot of people thinking about how transparent things are, and if this was how they intended that statute to work.
Yeah,
I-
well, so I think it's problematic,
Speculative.
to say the least, and I think that, again, one of the takeaways for me was that they are absolutely dead set on doing the Beltway so that they can have a toll lanes from the 95 all the way across the bridge, and that is what creates the revenue source to fund part of, and they say it won't be the entire 270,
Probably
which
also
is,
to make the procurement attractive.
and to make the procurement attractive, exactly. So that's sort of the opposite of what we want. Right? We want them to do 270 and get across start at the bridge, go up 270, put transit infrastructure into that, and then leave the Beltway really alone. And they're pretty much the opposite of that. So it's a tough situation. We got to figure out some solutions that we can work with our state officials on. That's all.
Councilmember Hooker.
I agree with all that. I feel like seen this coming for a while, and if this is, the bill numbers aren't on here, but we're talking about House Bill 1091,
Correct.
among other things. I think we need to support that. You're being very kind, but I don't know anyone who remembers, who thought the P3 law would be used unilaterally by the executive branch to deliver a big transportation project without the support of the General Assembly or local officials. That was definitely not the intent of the P3 legislation or anybody, I don't know anybody
I
envisioning it.
recall that the P3 legislation largely was about state center initially. But it's a state statute that applies to all P3s, so,
Right,
But in
but
this-
again, something the General Assembly
Right.
supported, the General Assembly supported the Purple Line overwhelmingly, as did all the local officials. Now it's being used as an end run because of this sort of, it's not really a loophole, but nobody envisioned this, to my recollection. I don't know, I haven't heard anybody say anything to the contrary. So I very much think we ought to support that bill, and we should be.
Okay, I had talked to Amanda about it, and we talked about it. I'll send a paragraph to Amanda about the bill, and, but I believe the county executive intends to support that piece of legislation.
Thank you.
Councilmember Glass.
So last week, we had the opportunity as a body to speak with the Transportation Secretary at full council, and then the T&E Committee had an opportunity to speak with the other, or the only P3 of this size within the state. And I walked away from both conversations with strong reservations, and that's a nice way of putting it. And my questions are regarding the status of this piece of legislation. If you can give us an update, because I'm hearing lots of different things. Lots of constituents are very concerned and are firing off communication in all directions, trying to figure out how to move this forward. Can you shed some light on this process in Annapolis?
I can tell you that the piece of legislation passed very close to crossover, but it did get across to the Senate. It is scheduled for a hearing on April 3rd. It is not cross-filed, and so we'll see. I mean, obviously, the county will be there to support the piece of legislation. We have a lot of people, but recall the Senate has been very reticent about all of this. So, that would be the challenge. I mean, they did not include the budget bill language in the Senate operating budget. And, this bill was not cross-filed in the Senate. So, I think you see that this is a challenge.
And just to drive it home for anyone who's watching at home or on any other device, they should contact their state senators and share their sentiment, whatever it might be, regarding this piece of legislation.
Certainly.
Okay. The other aspect of the bill is regarding the P3 nature, and you, I think, used the term oversight, or that's what I interpreted some of what you were saying as. Does this piece strengthen the role of oversight, accountability, asking for information that, quite frankly, I found lacking in my conversation with the current P3, the largest P3 that's in operation? Are there any other provisions that strengthen the county's position, since we are a willing participant, a financial contributor to the current P3? Is there any other safeguard for us?
What I'd like to do is go ahead and summarize the piece of legislation for you this afternoon and send it on. I think this is done with an eye to strengthening that state statute, but let me summarize it for everyone in a really clear manner, and we can parse through that.
Okay. Because what I just want to ensure is that for any future projects that might fall under this, if it moves forward, that with the county, if the county is a contributor, participant in the project, I would hope that the county would have strong safeguards as well. Thank you.
Okay,
Okay. Personal mobility devices.
Okay, so this is a bill on e-scooters. that would classify these devices, which we know to be like Lime and Bird, as bicycles under Maryland state law. By having them classified as bicycles under Maryland state law, they're prohibited to be on sidewalks unless so allowed under a local ordinance. And there would be other things then locally that could be done should Montgomery County have these devices coming as shared ride, shared scooter companies that come in, not just individually, privately owned scooters. The bills were introduced by Senator Smith and Delegate Fraser Hidalgo and have both crossed over and are pending at this point.
All right, Councilmember Albornoz.
Thank you. Couple of thoughts here. One, I just want to let my colleagues know that the Department of Transportation is ready to unveil this program next month. There has been contract signs with 4 companies. Each can have as many as 500 of these e-scooters that will be dropped with, in my opinion, very little planning in terms of our preparation, in terms of how we address these from a policy perspective. There's also an active CDC report being conducted currently because of a significant rise in emergency room visits and deaths in other jurisdictions that have enacted these e-scooters. I have had meetings with my colleagues in the Department of Transportation as well as Department of Traffic Enforcement with an MCPD, and I quite frankly don't feel like Montgomery County is ready for these. Certainly not until we have clarity on exactly how to administer them from a policy perspective and not even knowing how to treat them or whether or not they're bicycles. And my colleague Evan Glass and I recently took a tour of Fenton Village in downtown Silver Spring, which currently looks like a construction zone because it is a construction zone. And so adding e-scooters on top of an ill-advised and unprepared traffic plan, I think is a recipe for disaster. And so until the state bill is enacted, which probably, if it even passes out of the Senate, wouldn't occur until October, if that's correct, then I don't feel Montgomery County is prepared for these. And I am concerned from a health policy perspective of the impact on our residents. And so I will be sending a letter this week requesting the delay in the implementation of this until at least the state legislation question is cleared up and we can have a full report from the CDC on recommendations made on how to address these from a public safety standpoint.
Okay, Council Vice President Katz.
Thank you very much. I certainly would be supportive of this body sending the letters from all of us. I think that's an extremely good suggestion and a real concern.
Councilmember Reamer.
Okay, well, I definitely appreciate Mr. Albornoz's concerns about health impacts, but I don't share the view that we should delay it or that it's ill-prepared. I haven't seen any, I don't know how you support the conclusion that our preparation is different than other jurisdictions. It is going to be a challenge to absorb this, but we did a pilot of the dockless bike share system, and we learned a lot from that. And you know, then they took in the lessons and they came up with revisions of their strategy to the MOU, and then they revised the MOU. So you know, you have to pilot it, and I think that's what this is intended to do. So I think it'd be a shame if people didn't have access to this kind of mobility device in Montgomery County. I don't see why we're different than, you know, all the jurisdictions around us in the Washington region. You know, I don't expect to see these going up and down Route 29, but I think you'll see them in your urban districts and potentially out into the suburban, you know, surrounding areas. I think of where I live, you know, it's very realistic to use a scooter to make a quick trip to the metro. And I think people will use it for that purpose. So I don't think we should delay it. I certainly think that T&E committee should take up the program and take a look at their preparation and have a chance to ask questions, absolutely. But I don't know why we would support delaying it certainly before we've had a chance to do that.
Well, it seems to me like it would be important to have a TNE and HHS, session, because in some ways, we do have to understand that we have to operate as a body. And so whenever, a particular letter goes out, it's difficult to do that if the entire council has not had an opportunity to chime in and take a position as a council. But there are, I think, issues to be considered on both sides, there is no doubt. So I would suggest maybe that a TNE joint session with HHS be held so that at least we can look at some, what might be some areas of compromise. I am very sensitive to the fact that, there have been jurisdictions where there's just been a lot of problems with the rollout. And so does it have to be a full-out rollout? Could there be some pilots that are, implemented, et cetera? I am also sensitive to the issue of access to mobility devices. It's something that is, more and more desirable. So it's like, how do you balance those two? So I would just, suggest maybe something like that before we take a full council position, since we have not vetted this, completely. Councilmember Rice.
Well, thank you very much, Madam President, and I'd like to ask you to up the ante a bit, because I think that this has implications on our education spaces as well as our schools. Are we going to allow them to be driven on school grounds? Are we, what age limit are we talking about? All these kinds of things are incredibly important. And one of the real important things is that if a person decides to use it and take it to school and then leaves it there, what's the responsibility of the school system at that point that now has this thing that may not be parked appropriately in the right places? It's just tossed down. Do they move it? Are they allowed to move it? What's the liability associated with it? All these kinds of things are actually real things that are out there. And what if somebody else picks it up and damages it? Then is the school system responsible? These are all things that, again, we haven't talked about. And so from that perspective, I
Have a
think that,
council session.
yeah, I think that would be helpful.
Anybody else have any
Yeah, I
other
just
ideas?
wanted
Council Vice President Gott.
Yeah, I just think that we should, first off, I thought, didn't you say there was 4 different contracts of 500 each? I mean, that 2,000 of these is more than a pilot, and I think that we should at least have asked them not to do the contracts until that we have the ability to have the discussion. I mean, I think that's the fairest thing to do at this point.
No, absolutely, that's fair. I was referring to the possibility that we might, end up at a place where we can suggest a pilot. And so, so I think it's fair to say, please hold off until we have an opportunity to vet this, because we haven't had a session on this. And hopefully then communicate with the executive that, we would like to suggest a different course. So we'll work with Megan and you, Marlene, to schedule that. All right?
Quick comment.
Yes.
Just, it's important that they be rolled out in spring, because that's when the weather changes. And so if we need to move quickly on our deliberation, I think it'd be helpful to talk to DOT about what their timing considerations are. I think it'd be great to talk about it at full council, but I think we need to be time sensitive as
Well,
well.
we're going to look at all of that, but I think I'm hearing, from the majority of my colleagues, that they want to have at least an opportunity for a session on it. So, we'll communicate all of this, but I think the will of the council is to have a council session, and we'll look at our schedule and incorporate that, and then we'll communicate with DOT that this would be our preference. Okay?
Okay.
Can I just say one thing? I think, understand all of that. Where we were with these bills was just, it was better to do something to reclassify them as bicycles than to do nothing. If you do nothing, then they're going to roll out and you have no ability
Yeah,
to do it.
absolutely. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Next item is video bus lane enforcement, and I'm just going to call this a flaw in the priorities process because this is on the list, and this one's difficult. I think it's on the list in anticipation of bus rapid transit and concern that those would be dedicated bus lanes, and at some point there would be violations of that, and looking down the road, and then down the road a little further, and down the road further, and that there would be a desire to have automated camera system that you could ticket violators with. So Baltimore City is also has been engaged in this discussion for a number of years and is struggling mightily to get traction in Annapolis. They put in a study bill that we tried to tag ourselves onto just to say, well, let's get us in the study bill. And then also there was a not cross-filed Senate bill that actually allowed the program for MTA in Baltimore City that did not progress. Feeling bad about this, I decided I would try and pursue, if we have a documented problem in the county, and also how many dedicated bus lanes we have right now, to see if we could build a case that we have an existing problem, and I've not been able to do that. We don't have many dedicated lanes at this time, and also when I asked about if there was ever any ticketing in any of these lanes, the answer was no. So I think this is something that, well, I will tell you, I don't believe that we're going to be able to be successful on advancing this year, and I would say that over the summer, I think that we need to work on a stronger case. Annapolis has, for many years now, been quite resistant about the expansion of programs that involve automated enforcement when there's been significant problems, particularly, for example, with school buses. So I think that this one was a lift that I'm going to fail to deliver on this year. So there's not a lot going on this one.
What I like to do, Melanie, because we have committee meetings at 2.
Okay.
So looking at the rest of the priority items, can you just please kind of, hit the highlights? I mean, I think hopefully we're all pretty familiar with the letter, our priorities. We're not going to make it,
I
So if
think,
we-
I think you are very familiar with, you're likely familiar with what's going on with the RPS, because it's been in the press a lot. Just real, if we can all just hurry fast.
Very brief. So the bill that is moving would be 50% by 2030, Tier 1, 17.5% would be solar. The bill, as it stands now, would remove waste to energy from Tier 1. So that would mean the renewable energy credits related to waste to energy would have to be sold to other states, very similar to the bill last year. This bill has moved out of the Senate, is in the House. The House has not moved any versions of the RPS bill. Moving along, I will also do the housing component. We spoke last year about DHCA working with DHCD to develop funding mechanism to preserve market rate housing. I spoke to folks at DHCA that hasn't moved forward at this time. Presumably everybody's in session, that sort of thing. However, the budget has $4 million in it for the National Capital Strategic Economic Development Fund. That is a new fund. It was funded for the first time last year. It is mostly earmarked for inside the Beltway for Prince George's and Montgomery counties. So it's a significant amount of money. Last year it was $1 million. Montgomery County projects received $450,000 of it. So that is a substantial component. It's for pre-development activities for commercial and residential.
Okay, under HHS, the first priority, we had budget language inserted that restricts $100,000 of DDA's budget until they report back to us on what the Office of the Attorney General thinks about our proposal to secure a Medicaid match. So that's in place in the budget. As far as public health grant funding, we had also in the budget $100,000 fenced to be spent for the TB grant program. So that was a success there. For the crisis evaluation unit beds priority, there will be a work group in response to House Bill 306, and Director Green has agreed to represent the county should he's moving forward with being put on the work group. So that is also progress in that area. And then our last priority dealt with drawing the Kerwin Commission's attention towards Excels. That was a part of their report did acknowledge that as we require providers to move up the Excel's ladder, that does put some business and operation pressure on these providers, and we wouldn't want to see them have to close their doors in response. Kerwin did acknowledge this in their report. The bills this year don't deal with these underlying priority areas, so the door is still open for this to be picked up by Kerwin, and they are aware of it. So.
The MOVE program, I think there's going to be joint chairman's narrative that the operating budget conferees will look at to at least task the Department of Commerce with why they haven't funded the program, if there's changes to the program that they would suggest so that they could see their way clear, or if there's another program, an incentive program that already exists that they could use for this purpose. Currently, Montgomery County is the only county with a MOVE program, but it's been a very successful program in the county. This is the businesses impacted for state construction projects. This is about the Purple Line impacted businesses, and this bill is not advancing.
For victims' rights, things are actually moving in the area of human trafficking and sexual assault with vacature, safe harbor, and coercive labor practices. There's legislation on all three of those fronts, and it all seems to be moving forward. It may not be what everybody wants, but the Maryland Human Trafficking Task Force seemed to be relatively satisfied and happy that it was going forward. With domestic violence, one of the biggest bills, I think, is the Protective Order Relief Eligibility Act, which would clarify a 2015 law to allow victims of date rape to qualify for a protective order rather than the lesser peace order. That's something that we have supported. Rape kits, there's a testing grant out that is also moving forward that would give money that would be administered by GOCAP, the Governor's Office of Crime Control and Prevention, to try to get to the issue of untested rape kits. Moving on to public safety for Next Gen 911, that bill is moving forward. The 911 Commission bill, which was spearheaded by Senator Kagan, expects to pass this week and would go to the governor. And this would provide, implement many of, if not all, of the unanimous recommendations from the Next Gen 911 Commission to roll out this new technology that I think you all are aware of. I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any questions about that. The next piece is school bus monitoring cameras. At Montgomery County's request, we have two bills, one sponsored by Delegate Lopez, the other by Senator King, that would get rid of or make permanent the $250 fine for going by a school bus with its lights on. Gang violence is the next priority under public safety. I was wrong in the task force to study Maryland's criminal gang statutes. That actually the report's not due until June of 2020. So at this point, there doesn't seem to be a whole lot going on in the legislature with regard to gang violence. The governor has been announcing a number of initiatives. Montgomery County got some money last summer for gang violence, but nothing legislative at this point until the task force reports.
Okay, next section relates to local decision-making authority, and what we mean by there is that every year we have a battle with preemption in any number of topics. The big issue this year was minimum wage, but the minimum wage bill that has passed does not include preemption. That bill is on the governor's desk. I think most folks expect him to veto it in time for the Maryland General Assembly to take what folks expect to be an override vote. Be happy to talk to about that bill more specifically if you like.
Okay, we have two lights. Councilmember Hucker.
Thanks, Sarah. When you say the two human trafficking bills are moving, do you anticipate a vote in JPR?
Which bill?
The vacatur and the,
Vacature.
why am I blanking now? The safe harbor one.
Safe harbor.
I thought they were not yet on a voting list in JPR.
They are not yet on the voting list. They've crossed over.
Correct,
Yeah.
right. No, I think you're right, it represents a lot of progress, and I think we should do everything possible to urge Senator Zirkin
To move the,
take a vote on them, and credit to Senator Lee and Delegates Learman and Atterbury for getting them this far, because that's a lot of progress, but it won't mean much if we don't get a vote in the Senate.
I'll reiterate that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Glass?
Real quickly, just today I got an email about someone who received a $250 ticket by passing a school bus on a state highway all the way about 7 lanes over from where the bus was. What is an update on that bill?
On the school bus cameras, those bills have both passed. They passed in the House, passed in the Senate. They're back. The Senate bill is an E&T, the House bill is a JPR.
They're identical, right?
They're identical. And frankly, the hearing was very persuasive, and the chairman actually of E&T said, or maybe it wasn't there, but said they thought the fee should be $1,000, not $250. So people are very upset with the fact that this is happening. And to the person who got the ticket, what the police will say is that paint doesn't protect. So if you have an actual barrier, then that's fine. But if it's just a painted line, that we're not going to do it.
But it is moving forward.
It's moving.
Thank you.
We are experiencing some issues, I think, in our communities with, there doesn't seem to be an understanding of, before the arm comes out, if you're almost in the middle, then you just need to stop. And I mean, I know Councilmember Hucker, you've received some communication as well. And it's something that I was gonna, talk to the Public Safety Committee and so we can have perhaps a hearing on this. I think there's some, perhaps, community, public education, but also it would be interesting to understand how people are interpreting their thinking. It's like, well, it's like a yellow light, and so what am I supposed to do if I slam my brakes and I get hit by the car behind me? So anyway, I just think it's worth, because now the amount of feedback has grown exponentially, so there seems to be something amiss in terms of interpretation.
I would only add, if you have that violation and you're seen by a police officer, it's a $570.
Yeah, no, I know. Councilmember Rice.
Yeah, well, so certainly as the chair of the Education and Culture Committee, I look forward to this discussion. This is something that I've pushed for a very long time. I think our fine is far too low. And it's obvious that people continue to put children's lives at risk every single day as we see these number of past school buses continue to increase. And so I look forward to this discussion. It's interesting. I'd love to, because every single one is captured on video, and that video is available. The stories that many people who have contacted my office have told me have been kind of not exactly what the video purports, and they do a great job of looking at that video quite extensively to make sure. And there are questionable circumstances, one that you raised, Council President Navarro, in which they kick things like that out. They don't do those when people are trapped in between. But these are ones that clearly, because the cameras are mounted and feed from the back of the bus, so you'd have to be behind the bus. And then the stop arm is already extended is only when it becomes active. So you would have had to travel the entire length of the bus before you would actually receive that fine. So with that being said, I think that, again, it'll be helpful for us to have this hearing so we can talk through all of the mechanics of how it actually works and the people who are truly being fined.
Yeah, absolutely, because obviously people need to know all these details, and there seems to be some issues, and it's growing, like, as I said, it's growing in numbers. Great. Next item.
Okay, so the next item you're very familiar with is small cells, and as you know, the bills has been assigned, well, both bills, proponents, opponents, have been assigned to summer study. The nature of that summer study is unknown. A summer study can take the form of one briefing by a committee. It could take the form of a workforce or work group, or that the chairs of committees put together or asked to be put together. So it remains to be seen what the nature of that summer study will be, but that's the status right now.
Councilmember Reamer?
Were you going to add anything to that, Mel, or, okay?
I was going to move on to capital projects.
Yeah. Not much to say, other than, to me, what this feels like is, them giving us a little more time at the local level to do our own ordinances, because they're getting more and more serious about this. And I continue to believe we need to act here locally on our own ordinance. And if we don't, we're going to end up with something that's a lot worse than what we would create if we acted ourselves. And to me, that's borne out by the discussion in Annapolis, and so I continue to hope to work with my colleagues to enact a Montgomery County ordinance to regulate the deployment of this infrastructure.
Okay,
Okay, capital. So school construction, we've discussed this, it's a TBD. Montgomery College, there's this project, it's a big project, it's moving along in the manner that they expected. It's got $6.2 million in the FY20 budget, and the rest of it's pre-authorized or queued up, so that project's gonna go. Avery Road Treatment Center, turns out the county really only needed $525,000, so that's in the capital budget right now. And Poolsville is in for $1 million right now, and Roundhouse and Olney both have amounts of money in that they seem to be fairly pleased with, and pre-authorizations for the next year. And that is priorities list.
all right. Okay, well, thank you so much. I don't see any other lights. Really appreciate all the hard work and seeing the light at the end of the tunnel in terms of Sine Die coming down the road there.
Right, and I just will say that, so the last 2 weeks, you never know what can happen, so you could get calls from us. We could solicit your help to make some calls into the legislature, so pick
Absolutely.
up your phone.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Take care.